Welcome to a new episode of Rogue Wealth. You're here today because you're either experiencing deal fatigue as the weapon that sophisticated buyers use to engineer your surrender through the sales process, or better yet, you're one of the lucky ones that are getting in front of the entire process and doing your due diligence to be prepared. Imagine this: 8 months into selling something that you've spent decades building and tiptoeing around your team and figuring out who knows and who doesn't know and doing everything to keep the entire process under wraps while your CFO and finance team haven't slept for months being buried in due diligence, and your spouse actually stopped asking you where the deal is in the process because they can see it in your face. Exhaustion has settled in. And the buyer's lawyer and that attorney team has just sent revision 4 of the purchase agreement into place. And your banker's telling you, listen, this is normal. It's part of the process. Just roll with it. But the deal across the table that you're looking at today is no longer the deal you signed up for so many months ago. The headline number is down $4.5 million from the IOI, and the cash to close is now 70% instead of the original 80%. All of a sudden there's a 2-year earnout that you didn't budget for, and you probably don't even want to stick around for the process. And the working capital target just moved against you by $600,000. You look at your wife, you look at your strung out CFO, and you look at the paperwork, and you're just thinking, let's take the deal. Let's just get this done with. Right there in that moment is not exhaustion, but it's actually part of the weapon that sophisticated buyers use in acquiring family businesses. Deal fatigue is not a side effect of M&A. It's a strategy that's been engineered and field tested hundreds of times. It's been refined across hundreds of deals by people who are professionals who do this for a living against founders who do it once, and for the lucky few who've gone through it a few times. No one involved in the process, not your banker, not your deal attorney, not the M&A advisory team, is going to tell you that it's happening. It's not talked about. It's well executed. And their fees all come up and they come due when the deal closes. And that's the tilt against you. Today, I'm going to walk you through the playbook, the phases and the tactics and defense to protect yourself from all of it, and the reason why family businesses get hit the hardest. And the only defense that actually works is one that you'll catch on later in the episode. If you're within 5 years of selling, send this to your spouse, share it with your key second in command or your CFO, show it to your kids, because the wave is coming and so many family businesses are not prepared. We're going to kick off this episode with a refresh of Rogue Wealth Rule number 3. It applies today. It applies in this episode. This is a contact sport. Nobody's coming to save you. So play the game on your terms and know what you want with clear mind going into it. And it applies to a lot of the steps and phases, but here it manifests in concrete, objective dollars and cents. The buyer is not your partner. The buyer is a counterparty. They're on the other side of the table, and they happen to be a sophisticated, well-resourced, well-staffed, and professionally experienced counterparty who's done this hundreds of times and probably specialize in your industry vertical or industry segment, and they're doing it right now with intention to family businesses across the country. We respect their credibility and we honor their capabilities, but we don't want to confuse that with alignment. So here's the wave that people don't talk about. Cerulli has done a number that over the next 30 years, somewhere over $124 trillion of wealth will transfer through the middle of this decade by 2050. $10 trillion or more alone sits inside closely held businesses held by boomers. That's 2.3 million companies employing somewhere north of 25 million people. 64% of US GDP comes from family-owned businesses, which employ 62% of the workforce. And 58% of those owners have no documented transition plan. I'm going to say it again. 58% of those businesses and those owners don't have a plan to get out. They may have a wish or a desire. It may all be up here. It's not documented. It's not practiced. It's not rehearsed. Now, who's on the other side of the table? Who's the counterparty? 3.7 trillion with a T dollars. $3.7 trillion in private equity dry powder is sitting in coffers at the beginning of this calendar year 2026. Sounds like a big number. It's double what it was only 7 years ago in 2019. And 24% of that buyout dry powder has been sitting in the can waiting to be spent, and the clock is ticking. It's 4 years seasoned, and it's up from 20% from 2 years ago. So think about it. That money needs to be deployed and spent. And that money's hungry for deals, but it's hungry for deals on their terms. What does this all mean? There are tens of thousands of family business owners walking into the M&A market with no plan against funds of $3.5 trillion in pent-up demand looking to deploy when the clock is running out. The inventory is large, but the timeline is very significant, and the imbalance of sophistication between buyers and sellers has never been greater in capital history. I was looking and I couldn't find it. We are in one of the most significant generational shifts of wealth and business ownership that I think we'll ever see in time. And this environment is where that business sale is going to happen. And it's not the environment you imagine when you first thought about retiring or passing along this business to a future generation. You may not have even been thinking about selling it because your kids were going to step in and take it over. That's the undocumented wishes that we talk about that are in our head. But your brother-in-law who had his sale in 2014, or your next door neighbor who did it 10 years before, their process was entirely different. Private equity and sophisticated buyers then didn't have the level of capability and ability that we see today. And that's the deal fatigue structure, and it's their primary weapon in the arsenal to get you to sign on the dotted line and hand over the keys. So what's the structure and the anatomy of the trap? Comes into 4 phases. And your typical lower to middle market business sale runs anywhere from 6 to 12 months. It's very private. It's not what we see on CNBC or Bloomberg or read about in the journal. It's a private, highly secretive process. Everybody's typically held in that secret room, and the fewer people in that secret room, the better for the deal, and the better for everybody involved. And this is not necessarily the downside, but it's just the way it works. Nobody wants to panic or lose customers or shift relationships or lose employees. But those sophisticated buyers that we're up against know that the timeline and the secrecy is part of the structure. It serves them. It allows them to accumulate leverage, and it's quick enough to make it feel like progress is actually happening. What's happening on the inside, though, is you get seduced in phase 1. You get what's called the IOI, the indication of interest. You've actually made a decision when you sign that document. Interestingly enough, behaviorally, what I've seen happen is it actually triggers the thought that, hey, the sale or the deal is getting done. This is just step 1. We're just throwing around numbers. This is swiping right, and this is the date, okay? We throw language around like partnership and shared vision and your team and our team, and talk of legacies wrapped up in a compassionate bow. But you mentally start spending the money, allocating it, and maybe literally actually writing checks, taking your eye off the operational ball of the business. The IOI is not an offer. Too many founders treat it like one, and the buyer knows this. That decision is just a decision to start the process, not to sell. Part 2, the letter of intent. This is a lot more specific, a lot more real, and you signed something that actually started dating, all right? You've probably met the parents at this point. You've told yourself it's happening, you may have shared it with a few key employees, and you're even more mentally checked out of the business. and you're drawn into the process to focus on selling the business. You've committed to the turn and the clock is ticking. Now you're beginning to realize there's a lot of things that had to have been done, and maybe it's too late to do them now. Could be systems, could be contracts, could be tax and entity structures, it could be job descriptions or having the right people in the right position. Could be a lot of those things. We're starting to get into the space where all of those prior decisions or lack of execution are being concrete. And they show up in phase 3, due diligence. It's not a project. This becomes a full-time job of running the business alongside it. You get Q of E, quality of earnings, you get data room reviews, document requests that start reasonably and just multiply and cascade, followed by more document requests, contract reviews, legal reviews, customer concentration, key man dependency and key people dependency, site visits, management presentations. Your CFO, your ops manager, and your top 3 customers are interviewed by strangers asking you questions you weren't expecting on timelines that you didn't necessarily set. And then you may even be bending the truth on the reason of those, depending on how secretive the deal is. Then you find yourself 8 months into a distraction from your actual business. And then comes the adjustments. I call it the kill zone, phase 4. After those 8 months, after you've opened every drawer, after you've flipped every drawer upside down to see if there's envelope taped at the bottom there, and answered every question and given up 2/3 of your year of your life to this buyer to come back, and they bring you more adjustments. Your EBITDA gets recast, those add backs are under scrutiny, the earnout structure just doesn't seem to make sense, the working capital number shifts against you, the escrow amount goes up, maybe the reps and warranties are tightened up, maybe the things that you did just before you signed the IOI, that acquisition or that new technology project, those are treated as expenses, not as capital reinvestments. They come back to bite you when it comes to getting the deal done. Each one individually feels arguable and you can defend it, probably even negotiable, but only individually. And the trick here is that the buyer's not looking at winning each one of these adjustments. They're looking at winning everything in whole. It's so overwhelming that you just say, okay, got it, I understand, got it, I understand. We're not going to question because we're so close to the finish line. So in the volume and frequency of all those little nitpicks, you get this specific psychological event that grinds you down and uses exhaustion as a technique to gain your compliance to close the deal. So a $19 million deal turns into 14.8. That 80% cash to close becomes 70. And that working capital number hurts you by $400,000 lower. Your earnout gets kicked in. And maybe you might be required to throw some capital back in and hope for a second bite, which there's another entire distraction there that happens. And we don't know if during that earnout or during the process where you may have to stay on, what the reporting function is, who you're having to now answer to. And is it possible that you down the line can be unemployed from the deal that you signed up for? So now you have a choice. You negotiate. And I do believe everything's negotiable, but you run the risk of killing the deal, or you end up accepting less than you agreed to. Too often, founders take less. It's not a flaw in their decision making or their character. It's deal fatigue, and it costs them real money. They've been put in a position where they're now feeling out of control, where they started with the illusion of control up front. So now that I've given you the 4 big phases, the ones that kind of lump together over that 8-month cycle, let's actually take a look at the 6 tactics that you can identify more easily and know that they're coming and be able to discern when they're genuine versus when they're being used as a tool against you. So 1, timeline extension. What does this look like? Well, it's diligence requests batched and delayed, and markups that come back slowly. You may be given a very short amount of time to provide the diligence, but then all of a sudden you don't get treated with that same latitude of reasonable response. And scheduling a meeting takes an appointment. And so you get scheduling, you get these delays, you get these batches, and you're expected to come up with a quick turnaround. These are all leverage points. Again, focusing you on the deal and not the business that you're actually selling. The second tactic is scope creep. It's the supplemental lists and the third party specialists that show up, the IT security firm and your IT security guy who's not under the tent or may not be in the know, but suddenly has to have diligence meetings. It's the environmental consultant and then that third party environmental consultant coming to check their work. Again, each one of these is justifiable, but all of them together are overwhelming. The third tactic is the anchoring to the IOI, that initial date. It gets you mentally, it gets you emotionally and operationally positioned for an exit long before the negotiations, the real negotiations, ever begin. And so by the time the actual letter of intent lands on your table with tighter terms, you just put so much blood, effort, and energy into it, team time and hours, backing out seems like a failure. The fourth tactic, it's the escalation of the commitment. Each step along the way costs more money in legal and professional fees. It costs more hours in your own time and your team time, certainly your family time, and your family is impacted and feels it. And by month 7, walking away from all of that, if the deal doesn't serve you anymore, means it's all gone. And so that price is built into the math, into their adjustments, better than you do it going in without it, right? If you know that you're about to spend 8 months into a grueling process to sell the business, you're better off knowing the meat and potatoes of it than thinking it's going to be a one and done deal and you'll be walking out with a check. Tactic 5, using your own people against you. This goes back to that secrecy and privacy of the market that we're talking about. It's management presentations and customer interviews that aren't just diligence, they're intel gathering. Think about it. Your openness early in due diligence becomes the ammunition in late stage negotiation. The HR manager that's just not doesn't work well and doesn't serve the business anymore, but you made commitments and obligations years ago when the business was smaller or less complex. You just don't have the heart to let that person go. If that comes up during the process, that will be reflected in the purchase agreement and the recast portion of the sale process. So this is intel gathering. It's not just basic diligence. And then tactic 6, the retrade. This is the final move. These are the material changes to the terms at the moment of maximum deal fatigue. And they're designed to land just in time when you're the closest to thinking that it's done, but you're the furthest away from the beginning. It's dialed in to hit peak exhaustion. Your muscles are sore, the lactic acid's built up, you're tired, everybody just wants it to be done with. These 6 tactics have one goal, and it's always to shift the deal in the favor of the buyer. Frankly, if I was in their shoes, if you were in their shoes, we'd probably doing the same thing. At least here, we're starting to name the moves and the phases. That's how you protect yourself. You identify and name them and know what you're getting into. Why are family businesses more exposed? Or most exposed, I should say. It's what I mentioned earlier in the episode. And most of what I describe applies to any business sale. But family-owned businesses have an additional exposure, and those vulnerabilities come into 3 layers. The first, the founder's identity is the business. You take anything and do it long enough and it becomes who you are. So just imagine 20, 25, 30 years of running a business and involving the family in it. The line between who you are and who your family is and that business all converge. Selling isn't a transaction anymore. It's not as easy just throwing the keys and walking away from it. Because selling it actually means selling part of your identity. You have to transition that into something new. They don't talk about that through the process. And buyers explicitly leverage this by using the words preserving your legacy and carrying on what you've built. The language is strategic and it creates that emotional investment up front, but it's not demonstrated through the process. The second layer of this is that the family actually creates internal pressure that the buyer's never seen before. And they expose it. Your spouse wants security and certainty. Your children, maybe adult children now, were promised roles and promised things as they were growing up. I'm guilty of it with my kids. Your sibling wants liquidity right now, as soon as possible, and the biggest check. Minimal obstacles and minimal friction. Just get me that check. And then mom or dad don't understand why this is taking so long. So, when your wife is asking you every Sunday when the deal's going to get closed, and your old man is calling your banker to ask why the deal isn't closed, that's internal fatigue. And these internal factors that show up and they present sides of people you may have never even known exist, they compound the external deal fatigue. And while the buyer and that sophisticated buying team is up on a weekend trip, your family is running around doing the work for them, including your management team. Layer 3, the business suffers during this process, and the buyers use it. It's strategic decisions that get deferred. You don't sign that long-term contract. You may not make any capital investments. Revenue might soften. Your eye's off the ball. It becomes a leverage point because the trailing 12-month numbers or the trailing numbers in general, month over month, year over year, have weakened through this process. Hey, we need to have a meeting. We need to revisit the valuation because the numbers seem to have softened. That delay is engineered and creates the condition for which they can exploit. It's a trap inside the trap. It's important for you to be aware of it. Which leads me into the defense. This is where we can all benefit. 22 years of me watching families navigate major business decisions and transitions have taught me one thing. The families that walk out of major sales with their wealth intact and their families intact didn't get lucky. They didn't have better lawyers or a better team around them or somebody who worked harder. They were disciplined when they were exhausted. They experienced deal fatigue. But what defined their success was they knew what the process looked like before they started, and they understood and named the steps and possibilities along the way. They got deal ready before the deal ever got ready. And they held that definition through the messy middle. That's the game. That's the process. How do we actually break these things down for something that you can use right now? Number 1, define what success looks like in writing before you talk to anybody on the buyer side. What's the absolute bare minimum floor? It might not be ideal. It might not be perfect, but what's the floor price or the floor terms, including the consideration of cash, earnout, rollover, escrow funds, working capital adjustments, and any other things that you might have to carve out, keep, or sell beforehand. And then understand the timing and the certainty of proceeds. A $12 million deal with 100% cash is not the same as a $15 million deal with $3 million tied to a 2-year earnout and some sort of employment agreement and reporting structure that maybe the family's not prepared for, much less you. And then all the non-economic terms, employment agreements, non-competes, treatment of key employees, treatment of staff overall, since family businesses often feel as if their staff and their team are part of an extension of the family, name preservation of the company, community and charitable involvement, and everything that business has built up to become and represent. What does that look like through and after the deal process? And then you think about the other things, indemnities, risk, escrow holdback periods, any sort of exposures that might come back. Walk through these things and have a plan and be prepared for those up front before you go into it. the next step of defense for yourself and your family. Get your financial house in order. What do you need? Not what you want. What do you need? What do you need to fund the next chapter, the next phase? Some people call it retirement. I call it graduation. What does the estate plan look like? What do family distributions, access to capital, income amounts look like? What does the tax picture look like? If you don't know these base foundational items and ingredients, you won't know what your floor number should be. You won't know if you'd be better off spending time reinvesting in building and addressing the business and driving its value to hold a floor price or to actually sell it. But sell it on your terms and in control and not because of a consequence of deal fatigue. The next step, build your advisory team before you engage. You need an A player banker, an A player attorney, an A player CPA, and an A player financial advisor. And none of them should ever put you in a position to have it all under one roof. It certainly exists, it's out in the marketplace, but ultimately it's a relationship that you need to have at a level that serves you and your family in the roles that work, and build that team before you get into this. Specifically, when it comes to the financial advisor role, think about it this way, along with the CPA actually. Their job is not to hold the objectives and close the deal. Okay? Their job is to have everything aligned to the best of your interests and for them to function and serve you regardless of the deal closing. They don't get driven by a transaction fee. And this is the part that gets uncomfortable and kind of nobody wants to talk about it. Your investment banker and the M&A team can generate somewhere between 2 and 11% of transaction fees at closing. And so there's a lot of variables on that percentage range, dollar price, industry size, and so on and so forth. But that fee is on the table. And so when the banker and the team is pushing you to accept a deal that's 10 or 15% below your floor and leveraging the deal fatigue pressure that you're feeling, they're making an economically rational decision about their situation, not yours. And I'm not saying they're corrupt. I'm not saying that they're bad people. I'm just saying be aware of the structure and the process because the incentive structure actually does matter. And the next defense, align the family. Get everybody on the same page. Get everybody on the same page the way you did when you started it or when you inherited it or when you carried it through the tough prior decisions that happened, whatever they may be. They could have been economic, they could have been financial, they could have been customer related, but that alignment that carried the business through the tough stuff should be the same alignment that comes through this process. And every stakeholder needs to understand the timeline, the messiness, the agreed upon objectives before the buyer sends the first document request and before we start engaging in that process. Any family that disagrees internally during a deal is frankly a gift to the buyer. I've seen it. It's a pressure point and it gets exposed really quickly. And the operating team or the founder doesn't necessarily know it was coming. They may have never even seen that side of that family member, but it's going to get used. And alignment, or rather misalignment, becomes a negotiating asset for the deal, for that sophisticated buyer who's been there many times before. The test of all this is in the middle, in the spot where you're too far away to go back to the beginning and so close to the end that you just want to get it done. And so the test becomes to the one who's exhausted and who can't tell anymore of, is this a tactic? Is this part of the process? Is this normal? What's manufactured? So pull out your objectives, go back to that roadmap on the defenses that we talked about, and look at what you wrote down before the process started. Regroup with your A player professionals. Regroup with your family and have an alignment meeting. And then ask, does this deal with all of the adjustments, with all the retrades, with the extended timeline, all the modifications, and with our eye off the ball of the business, is it still clear the bar that you set out when you were able to think straight and not be in an emotionally involved and an emotionally invested state? If yes, close it. The middle's supposed to be messy. It always is. Easy workouts never built an athlete, and a marathoner never goes back through the middle and says, oh, I just wanted this to keep going forever and ever. You got to push through, and that's the sales process. But if it's a no, if the things that you agreed and aligned to up front come up as no's, you have a decision to make. And it's not the decision whether you want to push through in month 7, but it's a decision that you plan for in 1 month, in month 1. Going back, you've defined the floor and you've named your objectives. You've named when you walk away. You've named walk away power. You've earned it. Use it. Because walking away costs more than real money and fees. It's real time. It's real mental energy. It's still better than closing a deal that no longer serves you and your family, because there's so much more that you sell with a family business than just the business alone. And so your family's future is not an acceptable price for deal fatigue. That price tag is much bigger. All right, I'm going to leave you with this because we've covered a lot of ground. But deal fatigue is a real thing. I've shown you the phases and the tactics in the playbook that sophisticated buyers use against sellers. And I've given you the defense items. But here's why this is important. The most defining moment of financial events that's going to happen over the next generation will be the transfer of tens of trillions of dollars of business value from one generation to the next. Some of those transfers will happen at full value on terms the families spoke about, structured, aligned with, and set out from to begin with. They've been prepared. They were ready to go. A lot of those transfers, sadly, are going to happen at a discount because the buyers were more patient. They were more sophisticated. They set the pressure points and the trigger points to be more disciplined than the seller. And the gap between those who win and those who didn't get their fair share is not small. And that gap is the difference between a family that funds 3 generations of wealth versus a family that gets a one-time liquidity event and it's spent in that one generation. And that's the cost of deal fatigue at scale. That's a crime that I'm trying to help families avoid. That's what I'm working to structure and build around and build awareness around. The buyer's playbook is not a secret inside of private equity. It's taught, it's written down academically, and then refined across deal cycles by professionals who do this for a living. The founders who lose value in these transactions are not naive. They just don't know they were in a game that has already started well before they walked into a room. Just as those buyers can't come in and just operate your business to your level of capability and skill because you've done it for so long, don't think you can go up head to head against those buyers in actually getting a deal done, because they do deals all day long for a living. Now you know the game. So, if you're within 5 years of a transition, or you're in the process right now, and something in this episode hit a nerve, if I pressed a little pressure point, this is a conversation most advisors won't have with you. We will. I call the chat Getting Deal Ready, and it's the work we need to do before the banker shows up. Define the floor, give yourself walk-away power, build a team, and align the family. Get the business positioned to be deal ready, so when you sit across from a buyer, you're not the one being grinded down, you're the one with the walk-away power. You're the one in control. And you're not only in control on the first date, but through the entire process up until the last mile when you have to make a decision for your better intentions on closing it or getting out. So head over to prosperify.com. We'll have that conversation. No fee, no obligations, or no pitches. But if you'd like a diagnostic tool beforehand, drop onto that link below. You'll pull down our one-page map, and that's where you can connect succession, exit timing, and strategic planning into one single framework. Don't let the messy middle cut your end short. I'll see you on the next episode of Rogue Wealth.